Welcome, friend. I'm James, your host, and today, we're diving into another captivating episode. Grab a drink, get comfortable, and get ready for a powerful story that's sure to resonate. If something hits home, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive in. My husband's lies have spiraled into secrets I can't ignore and need your advice. Hey Reddit, I'm back, and I'm feeling more confused and heartbroken than ever. I posted about my husband's strange behavior a while ago, and things have spiraled out of control in ways I never expected. I really need your advice now. A little backstory. 3 months ago, I, 28F, gave birth to our second baby boy, and the whirlwind of life that followed was both beautiful and overwhelming. The chaotic dance of sleepless nights and diaper changes was familiar territory, but the underlying tension in our marriage was becoming increasingly unbearable. In the months leading up to my pregnancy, my husband, 28M, and I made a pact to quit vaping, a decision born out of both concern for our health and a stark realization that we couldn't afford it. Our finances were already stretched thin, with me opting to stay home to care for our 2 kids. While we both believed in the importance of having a parent at home, I had no idea how the weight of that decision would affect our relationship. My husband was working long, grueling hours at his job as a general manager of a fast food restaurant, often clocking in over 70 hours a week. This left him exhausted and me feeling like a solo parent, navigating the ups and downs of parenting alone while he was rarely home. The toll of his work schedule began to manifest in small but noticeable ways. I found myself shouldering almost all the household responsibilities, from laundry to cooking to comforting the kids during meltdowns. On the rare occasions we had a moment to ourselves, it felt like we were both living in separate worlds. I would attempt to initiate conversations about our day or our children's milestones, only to be met with half-hearted responses. His mind seemed to be elsewhere, likely consumed by the stresses of his job, which had become increasingly demanding. I often longed for the husband I once knew, the one who would laugh with me about the little things and share in the joys and struggles of parenthood. Instead, I felt like I was grappling with a ghost of our former selves. Now to the drama. The first sign of trouble began subtly, like a slow leak in a tire. I noticed my husband's backpack, an unassuming dark canvas bag, was a constant companion during his shifts. At first, I thought it was just his work bag, something practical he needed to carry, but soon I began to notice something odd. He'd take it with him into the restroom for these long, suspicious breaks that would stretch to 30 minutes or more. I tried to brush it off as just my imagination, but my instincts screamed that something was off. Each time he disappeared with that bag, my stomach twisted in knots, and the familiar sense of dread began to creep in. The vibe in our home was thick with unspoken words, a lingering fog of distrust that made my skin crawl and my heart race. It felt like there was a storm brewing on the horizon, one that could unleash chaos in our already strained relationship. Then came the rumors swirling around his workplace. A whisper claimed he was sleeping with his female assistant manager, a woman who had visited our home for a few gatherings. I dismissed it at first. I knew him too well to believe that. He had always been loyal and devoted to our family, but the mere mention of it caused a gnawing doubt to take root in my mind. Could it be true? My heart ached at the thought. As I confronted him about this rumor, I emphasized the importance of honesty between us. We need to be open about everything, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. I could feel the anger bubbling just beneath the surface, mixing with the fear and hurt I had been harboring. The conversations grew tense, and the distance between us felt insurmountable. He left for work that night, leaving the tension heavy in the air, like a storm just waiting to break. I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath us was shifting, and I feared what would come next. Days turned into a blur of snappy arguments and forced pleasantries. One night, he took a nap, and as I cleaned our room, I spotted his bag perched unnaturally close to our bed, a place it never belonged. The temptation was too great. I felt like a detective, and with each heartbeat, I knew I was crossing a line, but my instincts told me I had to know the truth. I reached into his bag and pulled out a vape. The discovery hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. I was devastated. Such a stupid little thing, yet it felt monumental. The trust we had built over nearly a decade felt shattered in that instant. Furious, heartbroken, and betrayed, I put the vape back and went to help our 3-year-old, who was having a meltdown. As I dealt with his cries and tantrums, my mind was racing, replaying my husband's lies in my head. This wasn't just about a vape, it was about trust, about the foundation of our relationship crumbling beneath us. When he returned from putting our son to bed, I confronted him again. "You want to tell me what you've been lying about?" I shot at him, my voice sharper than I intended. He froze, his head buried in the fridge, and the air thickened with tension. "What am I lying about?" he asked, trying to play innocent. In that moment, it felt like a game of cat and mouse, and I was done playing. "I found the vape," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. His expression morphed into one of guilt, and I could feel the weight of our unspoken issues hanging over us like a dark cloud. He tried to brush it off, insisting it was just a momentary lapse, but I wasn't buying it. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface now bubbled over, and I found myself demanding answers. Days dragged on, filled with awkward silences. I wasn't giving him the silent treatment, but I also wasn't willing to engage in his attempts at casual conversation. Every time he tried to chat about video games or whatever meaningless topic, I simply responded with a flat okay. The rift between us grew wider, and my heart felt heavy with despair. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, but every time I opened my mouth, I was met with his defensive demeanor. The frustration clawed at me, and I felt like I was losing my husband to a wall he was building between us. My mind raced with questions. What was he hiding? Why did he feel the need to lie about something so trivial? It felt as though I was losing the person I had known and loved for nearly a decade, and the thought terrified me. Each day felt longer than the last, stretching out in front of me like an endless tunnel of uncertainty. Then one night, after the boys were finally asleep, he plopped down in the recliner next to me, trying to bridge the gap. "You realize we aren't okay, right?" I said, my heart racing. "You still haven't apologized." He hesitated, then finally admitted, "You're right. I am sorry. I didn't know how, or didn't want to bring it up again." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. This was progress, but it felt too little, too late. "You could have just said sorry?" I replied, tears brimming in my eyes. I explained how important honesty was to me and how much I felt betrayed by his lies, especially about something so trivial. "How am I supposed to trust you with the big stuff if you can't even be honest about this?" I implored, my voice thick with emotion. He nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. It was as if he was grappling with something far deeper than I could understand. Weeks passed, and I finally gained access to his bank account. It was a necessary move. I needed to understand our finances better. As I went through the statements, my heart sank when I realized he was spending nearly $400 a month at gas stations, most of it on energy drinks and vaping. My blood boiled. "You can't keep doing this," I said, confronting him about the expenses. It felt like I was wrestling with the ghost of the man I married. I tried to show him that if he bought these things at the grocery store, we could save a fortune. I presented him with a budget plan, highlighting how cutting back could help alleviate some of our financial strain. But the conversations often devolved into arguments, leaving us both feeling drained and defeated. He would brush off my concerns, insisting he needed the energy to keep up with work, and I could feel my frustration growing. I was desperate to find common ground, but the very foundation of our relationship felt shaky. The real shocker. Then came the moment that shattered whatever fragile piece we had found. He left his backpack behind while rushing out to help with a truck order. My heart raced as I glanced at the bag, the urge to look clawing at my insides. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. Inside, it was mostly normal, his work uniform, a couple of snacks, but then I spotted them, 3 prescription pill bottles. My pulse quickened. One was an antibiotic for an injury he had, which he had been too stubborn to finish, and another was a pain medication, but the third was the kicker. The label was mostly torn off, but I could make out the word Zoloft. My stomach dropped. He'd struggled with depression before, but we had always tackled those challenges together. Why was he hiding this from me? The discovery felt like a betrayal on an entirely different level. I stood frozen in place, the pill bottles clutched in my hands as waves of confusion and anger washed over me. Here was tangible proof that he was battling something deeply personal, yet chose to keep it from me. My heart raced as I considered the implications. Had he been taking these pills to cope with his overwhelming feelings, and why on earth did he feel the need to acquire them illegally? It stung to think that he felt he had to hide this from me, especially when I was always willing to support him through thick and thin. The irony of his desire to appear strong when all I wanted was honesty struck me hard. It felt as if he were building walls around himself, brick by brick, instead of allowing me to help tear them down. My mind began to race with questions, drowning out the rational thoughts that urged me to calm down. What else was he hiding? Did he think I wouldn't understand, or worse, that I would judge him? I remembered my own battle with postpartum depression after our first child, how isolating it felt, and how much I longed for someone to just listen and offer support. My heart ached for him, but the fear of what this could mean for our family loomed larger. What kind of secrets was he keeping in the dark corners of his life? With trembling hands, I placed the bottles back in the bag, my resolve strengthening. I had to confront him about this, but how could I approach it without igniting yet another confrontation? The thought of his reaction filled me with dread, but I knew I couldn't let this go. The foundation of our marriage was built on trust, and he was chipping away at it with every secret he held. I needed him to understand that vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength, a chance for us to grow closer rather than push each other away. The next evening, when he finally returned home, I felt a whirlwind of emotions churning inside me: fear, anger, confusion, and a deep, aching love for the man I once knew. I waited until the boys were asleep, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared myself for what I hoped would be an honest conversation. He settled into the living room, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. He looked up, and I could see the hesitation in his eyes. "About what?" he replied, his tone casual but guarded. I swallowed hard, the weight of my words pressing down on me. "About your backpack," I began, my voice steadying. "About the vape and the pills." His expression shifted from casual indifference to concern, and I could see the walls he had built begin to tremble. "I found the vape," I continued, watching his reaction closely. He flinched but didn't respond. "And I found the prescription bottles." "Why didn't you tell me you were taking Zoloft? Why are you hiding this from me?" I pressed on, my heart racing. I could see him grappling with his thoughts, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Look, I was going to tell you," he stammered, his voice low and strained. "I just didn't know how." I felt a flicker of hope at his admission, but tempered it with the reality of the situation. "How could you think that keeping this from me would solve anything?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "I want to support you. You're not alone in this. You don't have to hide from me." He sighed heavily, the weight of his burdens apparent in his posture. "I didn't want to add to your stress," he said finally, looking down at the floor. "I thought I could handle it, that it was something I needed to work through on my own. I thought if I told you, it would just worry you more." The air between us thickened, heavy with unspoken fears and emotions. "But you're worrying me more by keeping secrets," I replied, my voice softening. "I need to know what's going on with you, especially when it affects our family. I can't help you if you don't let me in." Tears welled up in my eyes as I poured my heart out, revealing the raw, unfiltered emotions I had kept bottled up for far too long. "I need to know that we're in this together, that we can face the hard stuff as a team." He looked up at me then, the weight of his defenses starting to crumble. "You're right," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so caught up in trying to be strong that I forgot what that really means. I'm sorry for hiding this from you." I just didn't want to admit that I needed help. In that moment, the tension began to lift, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the turning point we desperately needed. As we talked late into the night, I felt a connection rekindling between us, a spark of understanding igniting amidst the darkness. We discussed the pressures of parenting, the weight of his work, and how he had been coping with his emotions. I encouraged him to seek professional help, to talk to a doctor about his mental health, and he finally agreed. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. As we shared our fears, dreams, and frustrations, I began to see glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with, the man who was willing to fight for our family. The next day, he scheduled an appointment with a therapist, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. It was the first step toward healing, not just for him, but for our marriage as well. Yet, deep down, I knew this journey would not be easy. The path ahead would be filled with challenges, but at least now we were facing them together. I hoped that this newfound openness would help rebuild the trust that had been fractured, that we could emerge stronger than before. Please, Reddit, I need your advice. What else can I do to support him through this? How do I ensure we keep the lines of communication open moving forward? Any insight would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for reading my story and for your support.